CPAs, though, are your best friend. So, like when a CPA, if someone says, well, I got to talk to my financial guy, I always know I'm going to get a deal when they're talking to their CPA. The CPA is like, where do you sign? This is like, this is the best thing you could do with your equity in your house right now.
All right, guys, here we go now. It is time to unlock more doors to deals. We're real estate investors here. We're real estate agents here, and we all have one thing in common. We believe that we can. We can live the life of our purpose. We can create financial freedom. We can build a better life for those that we love, and we can live the life of our dreams. I don't care if you're trying to do your first deal or your 500th this year. You can get to the next level, and we're here to help. Welcome to Doors to Deals. I'm your host and founder, Jim Manning. Today's episode can be found on doors2deals.com/024. Jason Courtney is a deal maker in the Three Doors network, and he specializes in creative financing deals. I've been in a mastermind with Jason for a while now, and I consider him a close friend. He even heads up our Three Doors creative financing division as well that we have for our team here in St. Louis. Jason's been able to build a $1 million rental portfolio without using any of his own money or any of his own credit. And I get it. This may sound too good to be true, but I can assure you it's not. He's legitimately done this. So we're going to dive into his story and how he did that in this episode. So let's get started, guys. Here is my interview. Jason, so welcome, my friend. So Jason and I, we've known each other for
2.5 years, maybe
2.5 years, something like that. And I just blanked. We've been in a mastermind together now for about 1.5 years, something like that. And Jason's just been doing some amazing things, awesome individual. And I feel real blessed that you're willing to kind of come on and share your story with everybody, and then also kind of share what you're doing with the group. So thanks for coming on, man. I appreciate you.
Yeah, I appreciate being asked. Hopefully we can add some value to some folks today, right?
All right, so let's get going. So Jason, kind of tell us kind of your background, where you've kind of like your story and a little bit of your entrepreneurial journey when you just got kind of kicking and going.
Well, my background's in custom home building. So my dad, when I was a kid, built a business out of our house building custom homes. And as I grew up, I started working on those job sites, cleaning them up, and learning the trades and so forth. And then started working on those crews and building those houses for my dad's clients. So my background's custom home building. At some point, my dad decided, hey, you should get into the sales part of the business. So I started designing and selling custom homes for my dad's clients sometime around 2000, in the early 2000. And so I started designing and selling custom homes, and that's what I did that's how I kind of got into the real estate end of it instead of just pounding nails and, doing more of the labor thing. And so in 2006, we saw things starting to turn, and I'm kind of a, researcher. And so when I saw what was happening, the non-income stated loans, the zero downs, all the things that allowed people to buy houses that probably shouldn't have been, and how that was affecting, the market. When things started to tank by 2008, it was, too late. We went from building 50 to 75 homes a year down to less than 20, it seemed, overnight. And so I started doing some research about that and why it was happening. And I could tell that it was, foreclosures that were basically killing the market. So I studied up on that and figured out, how can I help prevent foreclosures? So I started focusing on loan modifications and short sales to help people avoid being foreclosed on and try to protect some of the property values, at least here in St. Louis. And we went gangbusters. We built a business in probably a week that was generating anywhere from 70 to 100 short sales at all times. We met with brokers like yourself and said, hey, we'll do all the negotiation for your agents, and we'll keep you in the deal. And that business turned out to be a total cash cow. but we made no dent in the problem. So I'd like to say we made a little dent and helped a little bit, but the problem was just too big, right? And so one of the highlights of that event, though, is my team got to go down to Tampa and meet with some of the big banks. And I think one of the things that we got to be a part of, I personally was not a part of this, but our team was, is when the banks made a shift in 2012 to 2013. They were only allowing first owner occupants to buy these properties that were in, loss mitigation situations. They weren't letting us investors come in and buy them. And so they were compounding the problem. And what I mean by that is when a homeowner buys a house at a discounted rate and they don't move, that discounted price shows up as a sale in that subdivision and keeps the property values down, even if the homeowner puts $60,000 in that house to renovate it. So every time a house was sold to an owner occupant that was not dilapidated in every case, but for lesser value, they constantly kept bringing down the values of these subdivisions. So we met with 4 of the big banks anyway. There was quite a few of them there, but 4 seemed to be the leaders. Bank of America, Wells, Chase, and U.S. Bank. And so we said, listen, here's how we're going to fix the problem. You need to allow us investors to buy these properties, and we're going to buy them. We want a discount, but we're going to spend a bunch of money on these properties, and we're going to sell them for top dollar. We're going to, we're greedy, and so allow us to buy these properties. We'll put our money into them, and then we'll sell them at top dollar, and we'll bring back these subdivisions, right? And we'll bring back property values. And it was amazing to me, the light bulb that went off with these, bankers, that I thought, how is this so difficult to understand, right? But that's when we started seeing things turning. And that's when us investors started being able to make offers on properties right away before the whole, I think 41 days or something. I can't remember exactly what it was, but we all started buying houses like crazy. And guess what happened? The market started coming back, right? So that's one of those things that I thought was such a pivotal move in the economy that I got to be a part of. So I was pretty humbled to know that I got to help with that discussion. Although I was just kind of a bystander, it was neat to see that happen. But investors, we're the ones that bring the economy back, not owner occupants. You know what I mean? So I'm a firm believer in the power of investors. And I love that I am one, and I love other people that are doing it too. So the short sale business kind of fed into the business that I do now, right? So we're short selling all these people's properties. It was a feeder for our flipping business. My partner, Kevin, and I have flipped just over 100 properties here in the St. Louis metro area. And so I love flipping properties. I love taking a turd and making it look like a diamond. It's kind of something that excites me. However, I started losing money in 2015 because I was putting too much money into these properties. I wasn't managing the construction and the rehab as well as I used to. And, I decided to get out of that business to some degree. So, one of the things I learned about flipping houses and doing a little bit of wholesaling is that you're only as good as your next deal. And so I didn't like that. All my dad's friends that retired wealthy had large rental portfolios, and that excited me, except I didn't want to be a landlord. So I just kind of kept dismissing it for years. And so anyway, the beauty of the short sale business, or one of the things that opened up my eyes, is that these people that we were shorting their homes couldn't get a mortgage. And so they were forced to rent. And if they had a dog or, their credit was horribly trashed because of this, they couldn't buy a house. So my partner and I said, why don't we start buying some of these houses and make them available to these people on owner financing? And so this is kind of how the wheels started rolling and how the business started. But ultimately, what I do is I buy properties, in my case, with no money down. I do all creative structures to build my own personal portfolio. But the real key, I don't care how people buy properties. The real key is what you do with them once you own them, right? And so by filling them with a lease on a lease purchase, you're more or less acting like a bank and less like a landlord. So I really liked that idea. And I said to myself, okay, now the rental business sounds more attractive to me because I don't have to be a landlord if I position myself as a bank. Now, just doing owner financing is not the greatest because you can't depreciate assets you don't own and so forth. So the lease purchase, which I originally thought was a lease option, there's a big difference between the two, and I'll share that in a minute. But the lease purchase allows me to maintain possession of the property and still act as a lender as long as my paperwork is clear about how that transaction works. And so the beauty of it is I still get all the benefits of being a landlord without the headache of, tenants and toilets to some degree. So anyway, that's how I arrived at where I'm at today, Jim, if that answers that first question.
It absolutely does. And as you ended, my wife decided to drive out of my garage office. So if you hear the background noise, I apologize. So, okay, so there's a lot to unpack here. So we're going to dive into kind of the niche here in a minute, but I want to, there's a lot here I want to slow us down on as far as your journey goes. And I think there's a lot of good teaching points that we can go through here. So how many times have you had to reinvent yourself as an investor? So you started out as was it the short sales was the first thing you said? Let's go back to
home building. I did some speculative custom home building, made a little money doing that, and that was fun. But the problem with custom building is it takes 6 to 8 months to get paid, right? And so it's I like it. Don't get me wrong; the margins are fantastic. The key to doing specs is it's the dirt, right? It doesn't cost any more to build a house in Ladue than it does in Bonne Terre, but the value is in the dirt. And so finding good dirt, you can make a ton of money building houses, I mean, a lot, right? So
So home building, and then you started focusing on short sales when the environment changed.
Yeah.
Then you pivoted into just traditional flipping after short sales.
So I kind of did it at the same time, right? My short sale business was the feeder for the flipping business. Yeah.
Okay. And then you end up kind of getting into this last niche. So, at what point did you know, kind of looking back in your journey and you made the pivot, how did you know, when it was the right time to kind of try a new thing, or kind of pivot, like take me into that process?
Well, the reason that I like what I do now is I never have to pivot ever again, right? And so pivoting is an essential in the real estate world from the investment standpoint, right? So to answer your question, I definitely felt like I was having to reinvent myself often, but I kind of enjoy that, a little bit. I like solving problems, but I'll tell you what I like more, not having to work, right? And so I learned that, true freedom comes from, and wealth comes from ownership, right? If you're wholesaling all the time or you're flipping all the time, you're only as good as your next deal. You never really get to stop. Like when you're pitching those businesses, especially the gurus, they're like, well, you get the business going, right? And then you hire someone to replace yourself and you move yourself out of the business. And, this is how freedom comes, right? The problem with that is nobody cares about your business as much as you do, And so this is what I've learned, right? I should say this is my problem, because I think that's a great model if it works well for you.
I kind of want to do a callback here to last week's call with Ron Phillips. For those of you that weren't on the call, Ron does about 800 deals a year or so. And he actually went so far as to say, if you're flipping or wholesaling, you're not actually a real estate investor.
Yeah, that was awesome. I loved when he said that. You have a product, right?
Yeah, you have a product, just the same way a oral surgeon puts filling in teeth, or a family doctor checks up on, like families, like, or you name it, McDonald's sells burgers. Like, that's your widget happens to be real estate. But what a true investor does is that they take money or other people's money and invest it into an asset for a return. So and what happens within the widget of real estate, if we're just talking about business ownership of wholesaling or flipping, what happens is that I think investors make the mistake of not realizing environmental changes can completely and dramatically shift your business. So Jason's story is similar to Ryan and I's in that we started out defining ourselves as a short sale company. Then short sales dried up. So now what? Now we have to find a new widget, a new way to make income, so on and so forth. You have to kind of move with what the market's doing. You have to move with where the market of the moment is, and things can change. And we were doing, for a little while there, we were doing additions on properties, and then the market dynamics changed a little bit. So we pivoted into just kind of quicker turn and burns, or wholesales, or hotels, or you name it as well. So the market conditions kind of have that too. So it is hard to be able to kind of create that business where you're passive on it when environment has such a factor on it when it comes to being a real estate investor. Absolutely. Okay, so let's dive into, as far as your journey goes, like, I do want to talk one other question for you. Like, what's been like the most difficult obstacle that you've had to overcome, like as you're just kind of starting out and kind of until you landed into this niche that you absolutely love now?
Well, I think the biggest obstacle is it's tough to buy houses with no money, right? And so learning how to structure deals that make sense for a seller is crucial to what I do, right? And so I'd say learning how to talk to sellers is one of the biggest obstacles that people need to overcome, right? So I enjoy that because I take the approach of they're the ones with the problem, not me. They have a house they need to sell. I can buy any house I want, but they have to sell that house, right? So I think the mindset and understanding deal structures is crucial. And I think it's, one of the reasons a lot of real estate investors never get off the ground is because they don't spend the time it takes to learn how to structure deals, right? And so if it's not a win for the seller, they're never going to say yes, right? Or if the pain's not heavy enough or severe enough, they're not going to say yes. And finding out what that pain is extremely important because you're the doctor, right? You have to treat the symptoms. And if you don't know what they are, you could kill them or kill the deal, I say, right?
Absolutely. So let's dive deep into the structuring of the deals and your niche. So one more time, you kind of started to talk about it. One more time, let's kind of recap your niche, why it's important, and then we're going to dive deep into kind of structuring the deals and how to do that and all that. Okay, so so one more time, can you give us a good recap on what you're doing?
Yeah, so what I do is I buy properties, I take possession of those properties, and I fill them with what I call tenant buyers on a lease purchase, not a lease option. Let me explain the difference, right? And how you acquire the properties, Jim, in my opinion, is irrelevant, right? Now, my coaches love the way that I buy properties because if the poop hits the fan, I have, none of these loans are in my name. I'm protected as far as my own, personal assets. However, from an integrity perspective, I agreed to make these payments on other people's mortgages. So I don't really care whether that mortgage is in my name or someone else's. I'm still making the payments, right? My future retirement is at stake here. So
okay, a lot of people, so how are you, break down how you're acquiring them, like what, as far as with the homeowner goes?
Yeah, so everybody is in one of three positions, right? They either own the home free and clear, they have a mortgage with some equity, or they have a mortgage and no equity, right? So there's only three scenarios that a seller is in, and if you can address all three of those scenarios creatively, then you can buy houses with no money down. So what I do is if somebody owns it free and clear, I put together an owner financing deal, right? I can pay 100% of fair market value if they'll give me a 0% loan, right? So I'll pay every dollar I pay to them reduces the principal of that loan. If they have a mortgage with equity, I assume the mortgage that's in place, and that assume word is very important to understand. You can no longer assume loans for people like you used to in the 80s, unless you're an owner occupant. Well, we don't occupy any of the properties that we buy, so we're not allowed to assume those mortgages. However, every bank has what are called third-party documents. So you can be added to that loan as a third party, and you can make those payments on behalf of the seller. So that's what we do. We take responsibility for the mortgage. We don't take it over, if that makes sense. So we take the current mortgage subject to. If they have equity, then we will put a second mortgage in place for their equity that's payable to them with interest. It might be an interest only, or interest only. It might be principal only. It might be a 0% deal. Or if they only have a few $1,000s in equity, we might pay out some of that at closing. But if I put cash into a deal of any kind, I only pay 50 cents on the dollar. So if they've got 10 grand in equity, I'll write them a check for 5 grand at closing, right? And then I'll assume whatever the note is, and we'll deal with that. So if they have no equity, it's just a simple subject to deal. Very easy to do. So, and I'll pay up to 95% of fair market value for these houses, right? Now, I don't buy ugly houses. Every house I buy is beautiful. I want to buy it. I want it to be perfect. And I want to be able to get it under contract and fill it with one of my people before I close. And so in order to do that, the house needs to be ready. And so I only buy pretty houses. Now, again, I told you I love taking a turd and turning it into a diamond, right? So I have this desire to flip properties, but I can't tell you how beautiful it is to do absolutely nothing, get a check at closing, create a cash flow situation, and sell the property for 10 to 15% more than I paid for it, right? So that's how I do it. That answer your question?
Absolutely. So Ollie just chatted. I feel like I need a whiteboard to follow the 3 easy ways. So let's recap this really quick, guys. And just so you guys know, I mean, this is this niche that Jason has. You have about $1 million in equity on these properties over. I mean, it's only been 3 or 4 years since you've really been where this has been your main thing, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay, so.
And that's another thing, right? So all of my properties are leveraged, right? I don't own any of them free and clear, but I have a ton of equity in those properties and over a short period of time. And if I do nothing, right? If I don't do anything, all of these properties are going to be paid off in 15 to 20 years. And here's the beauty of what I do. When I take over a mortgage that's already in place, guess who paid the first 5 years or 10 years of that mortgage? Not me, right? So if I go out and get a loan, I'm starting over. You know, my favorite deals are ones where they've paid down 15 years on a 30, right? And depending on when they bought that house, they could have paid 15 years on this note and have no equity if they bought in 2006, right? Or, something like that. So these deals become extremely lucrative in so many ways that I never even knew about. Until I learned how to do these strategies. So,
well, and one thing that's interesting, guys, and it took me a decade to figure this out. I mean, or maybe I knew it before and I just ignored it. But like a $30,000 flip, that's really sexy and it's exciting and it's awesome. And if you compare that to owning a property for 30 years, it's absolute utter chump change. 30K is nothing compared to having a property for 30 years, getting it to free and clear, and then being able to make, 10K plus. Once you own it free and clear, being able to probably, if it's $1,000 a month property, being able to clear 7 or 8 grand a year after you own it free and clear, right? So this is a real creative thing. So let's break down the cash that you have in on this. you rarely will actually have any cash on these properties, correct? So
Zero.
normally you have zero. And
Now, every now and then, I will pay somebody off at closing. Right now, I don't like teaching to use your own cash because I think that if you can, when you have a bunch of cash in the bank, you make poor real estate decisions. I think, you know, like I could pay cash for a couple of these houses, but I have to look at that money as not. I have no access to that money when it comes to buying properties. That is operating expenses for the business, right? um, or whatever I want to do. I'm actually using this money to pay down the properties faster, right? So if I, and people think, oh, you got to have a bunch of properties. You don't, right? 20 properties, if they were a $200,000 property, I mean, do the math. Not to mention, if you owned them for 10 to 15 years and they appreciate only 3.5% a year, just in appreciation, you make 4 million bucks, right? Or 5 million bucks doing absolutely nothing other than just owning it, right? So the long play in this business, I mean, I'm in my home office, right? I have an assistant and a marketing person. That's it, and they are 1099. So the beauty in Jim, you know this, but the having a bunch of employees was really difficult for me. There were times when everyone brought home paychecks, but me, I didn't like that. You know what I mean? And so my business has become so enjoyable, and so free that I don't think I would ever go back to doing anything else. Passive income is really where it's at, and everyone preaches that. The problem is it really passive, right? Like Ron was saying at the last one. So my income is passive, right? And I have a retirement plan. If I bought no more properties, right, I retire with $35 million. I mean, can you live on that? I can, you know. So it's a crazy way to think about things, but are not crazy, but it's just we don't think about them, right? One of the things I learned, everybody, and I love that people think this way, but they're like, oh, I have to sell my house before I buy another one. I mean, I think that's so hilarious, right? But we're all kind of geared that way. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. You do need to sell it to me before you buy another one. But ultimately, we don't sell assets, we acquire them, right? If you want to become wealthy, you have to acquire assets. The guys that do what I do very, very well or quickly are wholesalers, guys that used to wholesale like crazy because they're great at buying properties at discounted rates. And they create their own portfolios instead of flipping these to guys that are going to, renovate them or renovating them themselves. They buy better looking houses. They pay a little bit more for them, but they build businesses like mine overnight. I mean, our friend Lance, right?
mm, yep.
I mean, Lance has already built a business in just 2 months because this guy's doing 30, 40 deals a month, right? How many do you think he needs to do in 2 months, right?
Oh yeah.
It's crazy, so wholesalers can turn what I do into a gold mine literally overnight. And so I really appreciate working with them because they're working so hard right now that they're ready to do what I do.
So this is, I mean, I just get excited talking to you about this niche, and a little jealous that I haven't looked into this more up to this point, right? But
well, you're working on it. I'm building a portfolio for you right now, slowly, but
yeah, we're gonna get there. We're gonna play around a little bit together, Jason and us are. So two questions that I've had that came through. So Jamie Haley's asking, what do you do with mortgages that have no equity? And I also want to personally know if a house does need a lot of work, but it's in a good area, that you would want to do this model and how you would structure that. So let's start with Jimmy's question first. So as far as mortgages with no equity, how are you kind of handling those ones?
some of those can be very lucrative also. So if there's no equity, right, or I'm trying to generate a gap between what I'm paying for it and what I can resell it for, I make them bring the cash to closing. So I've had people pay me $20,000 to buy their house, right? And I can choose whether I'm going to take that 20 grand and pay the mortgage down, right? Because I can just send that to the bank and reduce the principal, or I can keep it and allow my process to that over time to get that house where it needs to be at fair market value or less, right?
So so that's almost a reverse equity position where they owe 100 on it, but it's really only worth 80 in that
Yep.
example, right? Uh,
Yep.
so so I think there's something interesting. So like typically one of the best practices
I
to
just
buy
gave
these
you a
houses.
worst case scenario, right? So if
Yeah.
it's 80 and they owe 80, that's simple, right? But ultimately, I don't like to pay 100% of fair market value for properties. I will if they're in a high appreciating area and I get a 0% note and they own it free and clear. But if they have a mortgage with no equity, then I'll buy it at 95%, but it's got to be in perfect condition, you
So
know.
so like this so this is so contrary to like pretty much anything everybody ever teaches as far as you make money when you buy and you buy it at the discount.
This is
So
why I
walk
love it.
Yeah, well, so walk me through. I mean, Jason, you're a smart individual. You've been doing this a long time. You're very competent. Walk me through why you are comfortable paying fair market for a house in this situation.
Say that again, Jay. Why I'm comfortable
Walk
paying
me through
full
why you'd
price.
be like. So it's a free and clear. It's a property's in a nice area. It's $250,000 house. Why are you comfortable buying that house at 250?
Well, I'm really not comfortable buying it at 250, but you can be, right? And here's why. Because as a landlord or a real estate investor who owns assets, you get to depreciate properties, right? For 27 and a half years, you get to write off the cost of this asset. So depreciation alone allows you to stay in the black on properties that are, you own at fair market value each year. And over time, even during the recession or the when the economy tanked in 2006 to 2014, property values over a 20-year period, right, still increased in value by like almost 4%. You know what I mean? So it's like the stock market. It did go down for a little bit, but it's always going up. And so I'm in it for the long play. So I don't really care if I'm paying 100% of fair market value today. What I care about is 20 years from now, what's that house worth and what do I still owe on it? Right now, a couple things that I do, Jim, that I teach my students, right, is I build a portfolio that generates enough cash to where I can cover all of my personal and business expenses. Okay. Once I've done that, I don't have to work anymore, right? I collect my rents every single month. I pay my mortgages, and the difference is my expenses, my business expenses and my personal expenses. Once I get there, I no longer have to work. Okay. So then I teach them after they've built their first portfolio to build a second portfolio. And the sole purpose of the second portfolio is to pay down the first. So all the down payments that I take from my tenant buyers, right? Because I'm not taking security deposits like landlords. I take down payments like banks. So I use those down payment funds and I pay down my first portfolio. Once my first portfolio is free and clear, which should take anywhere from 5 to 10 years, depending on how you do that, I sell this second portfolio on the retail market. I hire an agent. I say, here's, 40 properties. I list them all and I get rid of them because I could care less about the second portfolio. The second portfolio was just a vehicle to pay down the first. Does that make sense? And the sooner you pay down the first, so let's say your expenses are $10,000 a month. You get $10,000 a month coming in on the first portfolio, but guess how much you got going out to banks?
A
It's a
lot.
lot more than 10,000 bucks, right? It's more like 50,000. So can you live on 50,000 a month? Probably, right? So the sooner you get the first portfolio paid off, I mean, I'm not sure what else, how much more money you need to make. I know the way you think, Jim, you're probably like, that's not enough. I need to make a million a month. I don't know. But for
No,
me, 50,000
I'm
a month,
not.
great.
Yeah, I'm not actually. I'm more contribution driven than actual money driven. I want to just like
Oh,
provide people value. Yeah.
yeah. I love the way you think. I know I tell you that all the time, but I wish that I have limited thinking sometimes that
Yeah.
hinders me from going big. I like that you're not afraid to go big.
Yeah, and so we did have a kind of like for a number of years, we had like I don't know what you would call it, but like a false belief that we're like, we want to do more deals, we want to do more deals, we want to do more deals. And we were pushing for more deals, more deals, more deals. And we weren't necessarily making more money. Like our expenses were going up at the same clip as the more deals we were doing. So, as we've gotten older and wiser, we're kind of looking at things saying, okay, well, more deals is great, but there needs to be more profit too, because you can kind of go down that rabbit hole.
Yeah.
So,
Well, and not to mention it's more work, right, Jim? Right.
oh
So,
yeah,
like for me,
yeah,
right now, I'm working every day now because I have created some new goals and I have some other things that I'm trying to do. But a year ago, or actually 2 years ago, I didn't work at all. I know you know this, Jim. My dad got sick, and I was able to stay with him and take care of him, and I didn't work a single day for a year and a half. Imagine being able to take a vacation for a year and a half, right? Like that's something I never even thought was possible, right? But the money just keeps coming in every single month,
yeah.
and my payments to the bank were automatic, so I didn't have to do anything really. However, all of my tenants have the potential of buying one of my assets, right? And so what happened to me is during that year and a half period where I'm caring for my dad, some of my tenants ended up buying properties. And when someone does that, you just go out and buy another one, right? However, I wasn't going out and buying other ones. And so my cash flow started to dwindle. Now I had enough to where my expenses were covered, still coming in. But especially when you have a house that's got $1,000 a month in cash flow and it sells, that's a huge hit. You might have to buy two or three to recover from $1,000 loss, right?
Okay. Yeah.
So these are
Okay.
things
So
that I'm
let's
looking.
do. Okay. Yeah. So let's get into the back end here in a second. Let me ask you
Okay,
one more question, and then we'll kind of talk about the back end on this as well.
sure.
Um, so you like to buy the pretty properties. That's kind of your model to not have to do the work. Let's say you find one that's a property that's like, this is a great long-term play. I have to do work. How would you structure that deal that does need work, even though it's not necessarily in your box? That might be in someone else's buy box to fix up houses.
Yeah, it depends, right? So sometimes if it's not that much work, I make the seller do it, right? So if it needs, I don't update anything, right? So if the house is totally outdated, I could care less as long as it's clean. You and I both know that if you can eat off the floor, that house will sell, even if it's outdated, right? Now, it may not sell for as much as it would if it had a brand new kitchen with granite countertops, right? But I don't need to sell it for that much because I bought it based on its current condition, right? So I am a firm believer, and I have tons of statistics to prove this. I don't care how outdated that house is. If it's clean and looks like it was taken care of, it will sell. If it does not look like it was taken care of, it was neglected, or if it smells, or all these things, it will not sell, right? But I like stinky, nasty houses that I can fix up quickly because I buy them at a better price. So, but if I needed to do some work, I probably would send that deal to you, right, or pass on it. I don't like doing work.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
So two things to learn here, guys, and we're going to talk about this next week. Hey there, if you're looking to get the ultimate edge for your real estate investing company, go to doorstodeals.com/invest for more information. Just so you know, a high percentage of the people that we interview on this podcast are actually already Three Doors Network members. And our network members have a lot of extra resources. They have access to an online training vault with over 3 years worth of content in it. They have access to vendor savings like our Home Depot discount that's literally saved thousands of dollars for members. And we have a weekly group coaching call, and we have a lot of other great things as well as part of the Three Doors Network. So make sure that you check it out on doorstodeals.com/invest. So two things to learn here, guys, and we're going to talk about this next week. One, his criteria, he is very, very specific on what he wants and doesn't want. So his answer there was absolutely perfect. And it's what you guys should all aspire to do as well, to have a specific criteria and say yes or no. Okay. And the second part of it is, uh, it doesn't really help me out on the question. So let's
Well, let me tell you this,
pretend
Jim.
like you're okay
I
with that
can
property.
I
How would
can
you
do the
handle that?
renovation. I can do the renovation. I can build a house from the ground up. I'm
Yeah.
totally equipped. I have more contractors than Quaker has oats that I love, that love me. So I could totally renovate the property if I wanted to. The problem with that is it's just not in my model. Now, let me qualify some things here because I know you have some wholesalers that are on here. Now, if the wholesalers are buying these properties at 60 to 70 cents on the dollar, think about that spread, right, Jim? They
Mhm.
could put 20% in that property still and make it really nice and be in a better situation than I am buying them at 90 to 95% of fair market value already done. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So that makes their pay down a lot lower. Like my buddy Lance in Dallas, right? He is still fixing these houses up and he's selling them, right, on lease purchases. Actually, in Texas, the lease option slash lease purchase is kind of a cuss word. So he's structuring his deals more like owner financing. And that the back end, Jim, is really the heart of our business, right? How you buy them is not that important, because you can go to the bank and buy 10 rental properties if you want to, right? But the bank's going to cut you off at 10. I think you should buy 20, right? Or I think you should buy 50 or 100, whatever you decide to do. But wealth comes from ownership, right? Flipping and wholesaling is a job, right? Or like Ron said, right? You have a commodity. You don't really have an investment, right? So I know it's scary to own a bunch of properties when the economy tanks, but all I can tell you is those that kept their money in the stock market are doing great. Those that pulled it out aren't. Those that sold all their properties are not doing great, and those that kept them are doing phenomenal. So
So really, if you do have one that would fit, you're really going to need to just purchase it traditionally, fix it up, and then do a lease option on the back end.
no,
Um,
no, no. I can still buy it subject to. I can
yeah.
make the owner, do a carryback. I'm not going to the bank. I hate going to the bank, but you can, and I have students that just can't convince a seller to sell them their house on these type of terms, right? And so I'm saying, okay, go out and buy them. Tell the bank you're going to build a rental portfolio and go do it, right? But some of my students have bad credit. They can't go borrow money, right, or whatever the issues are, and they need these type of structures.
Gotcha. Okay. So let's talk about the back end now. So you end up doing a lease purchase on the back end.
Yeah.
Um,
I do want to clarify really quickly the difference between a lease purchase and a lease option, because the lease option word is being thrown out there like crazy because of our good buddy Joe, right? And wholesaling lease options is also a very lucrative business. However, it's another job, right? Because you don't actually own the assets. You're wrapping them, or you're kind of being a middleman for a transaction, and you're getting paid a fee. But the difference between a lease option is the lease is the primary document, and the tenant has the option to buy this house at a certain price for a certain period of time. But you are still a landlord from a legal perspective. If you go to court and there's an issue, you are a landlord. I don't care what anybody else says. It's a lease option. So it's no different than just being a landlord. Don't even give them the option to buy your house if that's what you want. You know what I mean? But a lease purchase, the purchase agreement is the primary document, and you have a lease in place because they have not closed yet, right? So it's a delayed closing. The lease is only a legal document that you must have between you and the tenant because they have not closed. All right. So you don't do repairs, you don't fix things. They're buying the house as is, and they're responsible for all the repairs. The beauty of a lease purchase, Tim, or Jim, one of the beauties anyway, is that when I get a house back, let's say they don't exercise the right to purchase the house. That house, I usually get it back. 40% of the houses that I've gotten back are in better condition than when I sold them, because the people I sold them to are trying to buy them. They think it's their house. They're improving it. They're doing things that they're upgrading the house, right? This is why I don't upgrade houses, because my tenants upgrade them for me for free. right? So but the difference between the lease option and lease purchase is very important. And a lot of people just look over it. Oh, I'll sell on a lease option. Well, you might as well not. You might as well just give that. Don't give them the option to buy, because as soon as they buy your asset, you got to go buy another one, right? So you don't want to be a landlord. You want to be a lender. And the lease purchase puts you more in the lender position and less in the landlord. Now, the beauty of the lease purchase, the second phase of that, is that you still get to benefit from being a landlord, right? Because the deed is still in your name. You get to depreciate the asset. All these things that the interest you're paying, you get to write off, right? So all these things that you benefit from being a landlord, you still get with a lease purchase. Now, you can also sell on what's called a contract for deed. A contract for deed also does the same thing that a lease purchase does in most cases. However, contract for deeds can get really sticky if there's a problem and you got to go to court. A lease purchase, if you end up going to court, the judge just allows you to evict them, you get your asset back, and it's just a cleaner way to do it. So I choose to sell on lease purchases, and I'm in Missouri, right? So it works well for us.
So it can depend on where you're at, okay? Which you have to be kind of aware of what your state's rules and guidelines are. Do you, as far as the timing goes on it, what's a typical timeline of do you give the person 2 years, 3 years, 20 years? Like, what do you typically do when you structure the lease option?
So I do a 3-year lease primarily. I'll go up to 5. The only reason that I don't like a 5-year lease is because I'm agreeing to a purchase price for too long. The house is going to go up in value. So a 3-year lease, so my contracts work like this. I can raise the rent payment every month, and I can raise the purchase price every year. And I can raise the purchase price every year. Now, I don't do that because I don't want to incentivize my tenant to buy this asset, right? Now, if they do everything they're supposed to and they buy the asset, great. I'm not going to do anything to stop them from buying it. But I don't want to incentivize them to get their own loan by creating pain every year, raising the price, raising the monthly, right? I want them to be comfortable for that entire 3-year period. At the end of the 3-year period, if they haven't bought yet, my contracts go month to month, but I get to raise the price to whatever fair market value is at the time, right? So it allows me to renegotiate and continue to capture that appreciation as long as I own the asset. That makes sense? There's a lot to what I do, Jim, so I know you're trying to get down to some nuts and bolts, but
yeah, well, I'm trying to ask questions too so people can understand it.
Sure.
Okay, so there's a lot to it. Can raise the rent payments. So do you ever, at any point, have you ever turned some of these into just more traditional long-term rentals? Like if,
Nope.
let's say a lease option, the person can't buy it. Like, have you ever been tempted to just put in a traditional tenant?
Never. So I have had tenants that decided not to buy, that said, hey, can we just, do a rental? I said, I don't do rentals. You'll have to find another place if that's what you're looking. I'm trying to sell this house. Why don't you want to buy it? And then if they decide that they want to be in a rental situation, they have to move, because I don't do rental situations. I'm trying to help people become homeowners, and I'm giving them every opportunity to do so. I do absolutely nothing to deter them. They have to repair their own credit. I'm not going to help them repair their credit. When I pull their credit reports, I can see why their credit is the way it is and what they need to do to get a loan, and I share all that information with them up front. Here's your credit score. Here's why your credit score is where it is. Here's the things that you need to do to get your credit score up to where you can get your own loan. And then it's up to them to do the work, right? So I'm preparing them for homeownership the best I can, but ultimately you can lead a horse to water. But
yeah, so as far as screening the buyers go, do you have like a profile for a typical tenant buyer?
Yeah, my favorite tenant buyers are self-employed people that write off all their income, right? Because they make a lot of money, but they can't go to the bank and get a loan. So those are my favorite. But I don't wind up with a lot of those. One thing that I can tell you is has burned me a time or two is divorce situations, right? So in divorce situations, someone's trying to find another house, but depending on who the responsible party was that paid all the bills, you can really get yourself in some trouble here. So I've only had to go to court with two tenants that I had to evict, and one of them had great credit, was perfect on paper. She had an excellent job at WashU as a biochemist,
Oh, wow.
but she was the most irresponsible person I've ever met. But on paper, she looked fantastic. So of course I put her in one of my properties. Well, she made one payment, never made another payment after that. And the cops or the fire department kicked in my front door because the neighbors heard her car running in the garage when she was trying to kill herself. So it's like you can't scream crazy, right? But I try to do my best to make sure I've got someone that is on the uptick. When I look at their credit and I see they've got, oh, let me share something else. Here's the beauty of my business. Or I get to decide who gets approved and who doesn't, right? So I get to ignore student loans. I get to ignore medical bills. Like, I can't believe that you can't get a loan because you educated yourself and because you got sick. That's a bunch of crap. You know what I mean? But I love those people, right? Because they didn't want to get sick, for one, and they're educating themselves. They spent a fortune, or borrowed a fortune, I should say, to better themselves, right? So I get to help these people when no one else will. So that's a benefit. But I do my own screening. I use a company called TransUnion Smart Move. It pulls background checks, credit reports, eviction reports, all that stuff, and um, that's what I use to screen them, and then I go with my gut on phone interviews.
Do you typically have like a down payment that they have to bring, or how do you have that structured?
I'm glad you asked, Jim. This is the beauty of what we do, right? So most landlords take a first and last month's rent, right, as a deposit, and that's it, right? So they're only protection. But what do banks take, right? At a minimum, they take 3.5% of the purchase price. At a minimum, right? That's if you're lucky. So most banks are 5, 10, and if you're over 400, and I think 26,000, you go into the jumbo loan, and now you're having to put 20% down, right? So I structure all my deals just like the bank, and I tell them the only difference between me, or the only difference between my deal is that instead of Bank of America being your lender, I'm your lender, right? So you're going to have to, put the same amount of money down. You're going to have to prove that you can afford the payment, and so on. So I structure myself like a bank, and I use those down payments to protect myself in case I get a property back that needs work. But both of us know that if the house gets trashed, I file an insurance claim, right? And most of the time, I'm at cleaning carpets and doing some painting, right? So to get it ready for the next tenant is not difficult. But the beauty of my leases, right? They're 3-year leases. When someone breaks a lease, and my statistics are about a year and a half into a 3-year lease, is when most of mine get broken. And so the beauty of that is mine contracts are become retroactive, so I can still come after them for another 18 months worth of payments. And so when they call me and they say, "Oh, Jason, we're getting a divorce, or I lost my job," I'm like, "Wow, that's a big problem. What are we going to do about that?" Right? And I try to help them, and I explain to them how the contract works. And so after that, they say, "Oh my gosh, what are we going to do?" And I say, "Well, here's what we can do. Um, I want you got to keep your payments current. I know it's going to be tough, but you're going to have to do it. And I need the house to be absolutely spotless because I'm going to start showing it. And as soon as I can find someone else to take over your lease, I'll release you from your obligations on this lease." "Oh, you'd do that?" "You bet I would. Be happy to help you," right? And so I get the house back in perfect condition, super duper clean. I'm showing the house while they're still in it. They're still making their payment. And I transition from one to the other so smoothly. And here's the biggest kicker: I get to take another down payment, right? So I use that down payment to pay the asset down so that I can get these things free and clear as soon as possible. That's the objective. So
What percentage of your buyers are actually buying versus moving on? Do you
For
have
me,
that
it's
stat?
less. Yeah, for me, it's less than 10%. But I have heard people and seen some of my students where that is as high as 20%. But
That
for
will
me,
end
it's
up
about,
that will end up buying the house. Okay.
yeah. For me, it's about 8%.
So really, I mean, the biggest, let's poke any holes in this model. So the biggest hole that I can see in this model um, is what happened to you over that year and a half when you weren't working was um, at some point 10% to 20% of this inventory is going to get sold off. And so like even if you have it set up to where everything's paid down, you're making 50 grand a month, then 10%, then next year it might be 45 grand a month. And the year after that, it might be 40 a month, you name it. And so you'll have to do a little bit of work there to like just make sure that you are getting some additional buys in. Uh,
That's the maintenance. That's the maintenance of the business. As soon as the easiest way to do it, as soon as someone buys one, go buy another one, right? That's
mhm.
the easiest way to do it, right? And also the other hole, that if there is one, Jim, is the same hole that all landlords have to deal with, right? When it comes time to sell the asset, they have two things to deal with: the gains from what they bought it for and what they sold it for, and the depreciation recapture, which also gains apply to, right? So I depreciated the property, I made a profit on the property, and I have to pay gains. So the only way to get out of that is to do a 1031, right? Or to deed the properties to kin, somebody in your family. So my personal plan is I'm building three portfolios because I have three daughters, right? And so I'm going to be deeding each portfolio to one of my daughters so they don't ever have to work if they don't want to. They can choose to do whatever they want with their time, hopefully, invest in the world somehow. But um, my plan is to deed those properties to them. Now, until I die, I'm keeping that money, right? So even though they own the properties, I'm keeping the money, right? Now, once I die, those assets will become the income from those assets will become theirs. But my plan is to deed them to my girls and allow them to depreciate the properties until I die. So, and worst case scenario, I do 1031 where I'm buying another property anyway, right? So the downfall is not as bad as people think it is with owning rental portfolios when it comes time to sell. But guess what? If you never sell, you get to keep bringing in the cash flow, right? So you get to live off the income. You don't have to sell it 27 and a half years. You just can't depreciate them anymore. That's all.
All right. So we're right here at the time. We had kind of a lot of times we open up for Q&A. We kind of had some questions kind of throughout the chat.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
No, you're good. So I kind of sent something out as far as trying out kind of like an open networking bit with the group here. And
I came in a little late, loved what I'm hearing, and just need to have some understanding about the people that you're buying the homes from. If you would, their situation that this is a good deal for them if they would take this deal. As I understand it, the loan stays in their name.
It does. Yep.
Okay. If you would go ahead and elaborate on that for me.
So the loan staying in their name becomes less of an issue if the house is to them consider so people don't really want to get out from underneath the house. They want to get out from underneath the payments or the pain of that asset, right? And so my objective is to say we're going to take that away, right? And your obligation is to only make sure that we make the payments, right? And so our business model does not really allow for us to not make the payments, because if we lose the asset, all the proceeds that we would make on the back end of the property are gone, right? So we're highly motivated to make our payments. Now, if you keep this house and rent it, right, what if the tenant doesn't pay you, right? What if they trash your house? These are all responsibilities that you're going to have that we're taking away, right? So what we're saying is, you have a responsibility to make sure that we're making the payment, which I'm telling you, based on our business model you don't have to worry about, but you don't know me, so that's your concern. However, if you decide to keep this house and rent it out, you have to worry about taxes, insurance, maintenance, and a tenant that may or may not take care of the property or pay you. So these are the reasons why you don't want to be a landlord. So most of the people I'm talking to are people who have houses that are for sale by owner and don't have enough equity to pay a real estate agent and are struggling to sell their house, or someone who's got a rental property that became a rental property because they couldn't sell it. Does that make sense, Tracy?
Yes, that does, Jason.
So if you've got someone that has no pain, it's difficult to convince them to keep the mortgage in their name. Now, if someone's got a bunch of equity, it gets really interesting, right? Because in order for them to take their equity and create an investment for them, right? So one, I will take their equity, I'll amortize it over 30 years at 5% with a 5-year balloon. That becomes an investment. They got to do something with the equity. What most people do with their equity is they put it down in another house. They think that's smart. Well, that's not smart. You're borrowing that money at 3%, and you're going to make a 5% return on me that's backed by an asset, not to mention is amortized over 30 years, which means the majority of my payment that I'm making to you is interest, reducing your principal very little. The investment is far greater to give me your equity and let me invest it than it is for you to give it to the bank to put down in your house, hoping to reduce your payment enough to where you can afford it. Right? Use the money I'm paying you to pay the bank on your new mortgage to reduce your payment, because you're making money at that point. So it becomes an investment. So investment-minded people, investor-minded people are easy sales, right? People who are still say to themselves, oh, I got to sell my house before I can buy another one. That's like saying anyone that owns a rental property can't own a home. I mean, that's just ridiculous. But people say that. They're harder to convince, and you probably won't convince them.
So my family, I think my mom would have done this too. So my uncle had health issues, and he owned his condo free and clear. And
yep, people who are on fixed incomes love these deals.
Yeah, so $100,000 was what his condo was worth. I mean, when you're at a health facility the way he was, that lasts you how long, right? But if you have $1,000 coming in a month through a deal, that's actually more important for him than to get the $100,000 right away, to be able to use that money.
It also protects the asset from Medicaid, right? Or Medicare, I mean. So Medicare has what's called a 5-year look back on your assets when you get sick as an older person, which means if you had an asset that you gave to your kids 3 years ago, Medicare can say, nope, we're taking that asset and we're going to sell it, and we're going to use that. We're not going to pay for your care. You have enough money, right? So because that house has been sold on what's called an installment loan, Medicare can't get to it. So it also protects the investment, so the kids get the money when mom and dad die than it does for Medicare to get it. So there's lots of little tricks like that for people that are on fixed incomes or elderly people. And these are all the things that you got to know if you're going to structure deals like this. But ultimately, I'm sorry, Tracy.
I'm sorry, didn't mean to interrupt. That's a big issue for older folks. That look back period. I mean, most people deal with that at some point.
That's right. Yeah, and when you're like, for me, my dad, when he got sick, he ended up passing away 2.5 years later. Well, when he got sick, that's when everyone started thinking about protecting his assets, right? Well, it was too late. When all the money had to be repaid to Medicare with his assets because we didn't protect it, 5 years in advance or whatever. Mm-hmm. But, doing an installment loan, they can't touch it because now that money and that asset has been promised to somebody else. So it is a big deal. Did that answer your question, Tracy? I don't know if it really did.
Yes, it did. It's a lot to absorb, but yes.
Why would somebody leave the mortgage in their name? That's, I think, the question you're asking, right? What a risk. That is such a risk, right? Well, and it is kind of. And so one of the things that we will do, we don't bring it up initially, but we will pre-sign a quitclaim deed because we're taking possession of this property, right? And if I'm them and I say, well, if Jason doesn't make his payments, I'm going to have to foreclose on him to get my house back, right? That sucks. So when they talk to an attorney shares this information with them, and then we say, no problem, we'll pre-sign a quitclaim deed that is held in escrow and is recordable upon proof of non-payment. That way you don't have to foreclose. You get the asset back immediately, and you're back in the same position you're in now, except I paid your house down for 2 years, right? It didn't cost you anything or whatever the situation. Now, we would never give a house back because our play is a long play, right? Not a short play. But you got to make them feel comfortable, and whatever their attorney wants, we give it to them. We don't care. CPAs, though, are your best friend. So like when a CPA, if someone says, well, I got to talk to my financial guy, I always know I'm going to get a deal when they're talking to their CPA. The CPA is like, where do you sign? This is like, this is the best thing you could do with your equity in your house right now, right? Especially if they own any other real estate. So the interest that we pay on these notes offsets capital gains, right? Because they're front loaded with interest. And the rule, if the house is owned free and clear, is that our deal, if we amortize it over 30 years at 5% with a 5-year balloon. Now, balloons are for clowns, right? So we don't always like to talk about balloons if we can help it. But we do. We offer them. That's another security thing for them. They don't have to wait any longer than 5 years for their money. But here's what happens 9 times out of 10. If when the 5-year mark comes up, do you think they want their money, or you think they still want the payment? Payment every single time, because as soon as you give them the money, now they got to figure out what to do with it. Now it's been in a secure asset that's been paying them dividends for 5 years. Why would they want to take it out, right? So in most cases, they don't want the cash at the 5-year mark. You just renegotiate. But if they do, it's no big deal. Just refinance and give them money. I don't like having to refinance because I'm starting over with a 20-year note. Hopefully I bought it with a less than 20 years on it, but every deal is a little different.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hey, Jason, this is Jimmy. Sorry.
Hey, Jimmy.
I had a question. I might have missed it as I was working, but so when you do, for example, like a 0% loan directly with the owners, or even any type of these creative financing ideas, how do you actually, because you mentioned like selling some of them, like how do you actually obtain ownership of these properties if you're not, if you're not on the mortgage?
Well, I buy it on owner financing. If I'm paying 100% of fair market value on a 0% loan, the only way I pay 100% of fair market value is if they own it free and clear and I get a 0% loan. So that deal works really well for me.
So you're actually buying and taking ownership of the property, and they're basically just becoming more or less the bank.
That's it. Yeah. I take possession of the property on every single deal. My name is on every single my company name is on every single property that I own. So I close with a real estate attorney right next to Jim's office in Kirkwood. His name's Jim Davis, or title company. Whatever they're comfortable with, doesn't matter.
Sure.
But I take possession of the property. Now, the tricky thing is the insurance, right? So when the loan is in somebody else's name, the bank does not like the fact that they're not included on the insurance policy, right? Because now that I own the asset, I need to be covered in case there's a fire or something like that. So the insurance company, the way that those policies are written is I am the primary insurer because I own the asset, and the original seller is an additional insured on that policy. Their name has to be on it if the money's being escrowed, if insurance is part of the escrow payment. If it's not, it's irrelevant. You just get your own insurance. But if the taxes and insurance are part of the payment, a new insurance policy has to go to that bank, and you need to be the primary insured, or you're going to have a problem if there's a fire or something like that. So the way to overcome, banks are like, wait, who is this guy? Right? Our loan is in Mr. Smith's name. Right? So
Right.
that can sometimes become an issue. Now, one of the bigger issues that nobody brought up that gets talked about all over the internet, it's one of those things that make me sick, is every loan has what's called a due on sale clause in the paperwork, right? So when that house is sold, the bank can call that note due. And then what, right? Now I got to come up with $250,000 to buy this house to pay the note off because the bank's calling the note due. And so here's what's really interesting. Try to find someone or a bank where that actually happened. There's none out there. The bank is not in the business of owning real estate, right? Now, I did have a bank tell me one time, Jason, you're going to have to buy this house or you're going to have to qualify for this loan. You're not the borrower. And I said, well, I don't work that way. And the borrower can't afford to make the payments anymore because they just bought another house. So, just tell your boss that we're going to stop making payments and he can take the house back. Well, about an hour later, I got called and said, Mr. Courtney, you just keep making the payments. Everything's fine. So, okay, no problem. So the fact that the bank could call the note due doesn't mean they will, right? And there has not been a case where a house has been bought subject to that I'm aware of that the bank has called the note due. Now, there's other reasons the bank might call a note due, but it won't because you bought it on terms. I guarantee you that. So anyway, that's the kind of stuff you'll hear all over the internet about buying houses subject to, oh, you can't do that because there's a due on sale clause. Nope, I notify the bank every time I buy a house. I call them. Now, remember that most banks are just servicers too, so you're not really getting to the investor anyway, right, that owns the note. You're talking to Wells Fargo or Bank of America, and all they're doing is servicing that note. So I tell them all, I now own the home. Here's the insurance policy to make sure that I'm covered. I'm added to that note as a third party. So everything we do is 100% transparent. We don't hide anything from the banks. We don't try to pull it. We don't have to, right? So a lot of people say, oh, just don't tell the bank, right? No. Don't do that. You could get in trouble, I think. I mean, maybe you can't. I don't know. But I always tell the bank just because I think it's important that everybody knows I'm the one responsible for making the payments. I'm going to take care of the asset. And if you don't want me to do that, no problem. I'll stop making payments. Then you can deal with it, right? So the due on sale clause is definitely, it is in 90% of loans, the paperwork for the loans, but it's an irrelevant clause. So,
hey, Jason. This is
yes.
Roy. Do you call the bank before or after you have paperwork signed with that homeowner?
After. Sometimes the sellers will call the bank and tell them what we're doing ahead of time, but I never call them because until I have a deal, I don't waste a lot of time on deals until I know I've got something signed and I got a buyer ready to go. So.
Well, and I think that, right, that's kind of what I was thinking. If you had the paperwork signed, then you're telling them what to do and you're asking forgiveness later versus asking their permission to go forward with things.
Exactly. Now, I don't know if I'd have been totally comfortable with that when if I'd have known that when I first started doing the business. I'm grateful I didn't know that just because I'm kind of an ethical dude. I like to be the most ethical guy in the room. But I've learned over time that banks don't give a rip. They know exactly what we're doing, right? It is not, they are not surprised one bit. When I call them, they're like, okay, like they're so used to it. They don't, that's like your Aunt Sue makes a house payment for you because you had a bad month at work, or something like that. Or, what I'm doing is I'm helping the original borrower of their asset, and they like that I'm helping them, right? Otherwise they're going to have to foreclose. So I don't call the bank ever until I've got a solid deal. I'm not going to, I structure everything afterwards. I try to I don't close on a property until I have a tenant buyer ready to go and in there. I don't make mortgage payments without somebody paying me, so that's how I don't put any money in the deal. I take a down payment from the tenant buyer and I get first month's rent payment, and I use that to pay the mortgage. I don't use any of my own money to pay mortgages.
What's the typical down payment? I think you touched on it, but I missed it earlier.
The average for me is 5 to 10%. I've taken as little as 3.5 on houses under 200,000, and I've taken as much as 20% down on houses over 450. I took 50% down on a house one time, but I don't really like taking too large of the down payment because, again, that incentivizes them to buy my asset. However, I've had people walk away from $70,000 before. They had no choice. So I shouldn't say they had no choice. Anytime someone enters into an agreement with me, if they put down a large down payment and they want their down payment money back, all they have to do is sell the house. What happens if you buy a house and you put 20% down? You're going to call the bank and say, hey, can I have my 20% back? I don't want this house anymore. It just doesn't work that way.
Right.
And so they're in the same position that you and I are in, right? If my toilet gets clogged, I don't get to call Bank of America and say, hey, my toilet's clogged. Can you come fix it? They have to call a plumber just like I do. And if they want their 20% down back, they have to sell the house to get it back, right? So it's, again, I make sure that my buyers know that you are in the same exact position as anyone else. The only difference is I'm your bank instead of Bank of America, right? And, sometimes you get into conversations about principal reduction, how much of my payment goes to principal. It's amortized over 30 years, right? We'll keep track of that. And when you're ready to buy, we'll tell you exactly how much your balance is at the time, and that's what you'll buy it for. And a lot of people say, oh, don't agree to, reduce principal for these people because you don't have to. However, I do it on every deal because less than 8% or 8% of the people actually buy. What do I care? And if they do, why not reward them for doing what they were supposed to? It's a good thing.
All right, guys, we are at 11:22. I think we got time for one more question. If not, we can kind of wrap it up. Jason, I really appreciate you, man. Thanks for sharing this. This is an awesome model, guys. Yeah, we're like Jason and I and kind of the Three Doors team, we're kind of actively been collaborating on this and kind of brainstorming on ideas that we can personally work together to do more of this for our business. It's we're believers in it for sure.
Yeah. Well, I enjoyed being part of the network, and I really like working with you and Ryan for sure. And hopefully we can help you guys with your goals of helping 250 people become financially free. I mean, that's an awesome goal. And if I can help, I want to. So.
Hey, Jason, this is Roy. I got one more quick question.
Sure.
When you're talking to these homeowners and going to do the subject to, and then you're getting deeded on the property and then telling them, you're taking over the payments, do you have any questions from them on proof of funds or whatever that you would have to provide to them to say that you are qualified to be able to take care of that note for them?
I've never had anybody ask me that before. And if they did, I probably wouldn't provide it anyway. But ultimately, I've had people say things to me like, well, what if you go out of business, right? That's a legitimate question, but part of the sales disclosures that they sign they're pretty rough, right? So if we don't make a payment, your credit could be damaged, right? Or the property could get deeded back to you. And so they're having to sign that they understand all these things. So I think that's probably why I don't get too many questions about proof of funds, or someone saying, what's your wherewithal and your ability to make this, payment every single month? And, I can make these payments no problem, but I'm not going to share my bank information with them. But I have tons of people we've closed deals with. I've done a little over 150 of these transactions. And I have everybody loves you in this business. And so sharing other people's experiences are probably the most powerful. So when I'm closing a deal with somebody that has a ton of questions, and that happens a lot, I find one of my past clients that is similar to their situation, and I give them their phone number. I say, here, call Richard, because Richard, we've done 3 deals with him now. He understands exactly how it works, and ask him your questions, because I think you'll be pleased with his answers. So I have a pretty good referral base that I use to overcome objections, because hearing it from me, I could be a slick salesperson, So now somebody just getting started, like with my students, I give them access to my referral base. And they say, well, how many of these deals have you done? Well, they use my reputation until they build their own, right? But if you're starting all by yourself, my advice is you just be honest, right? And say, I've never done one of these deals before, but I've done lots of other real estate transactions, and this is the way that our company is moving. And I think you'll be very pleased with how this turns out. We've done our homework. We know exactly what we're doing, and we're here to help you, right? But I do not provide proof of funds letters, Roy, or show them access to my bank account or anything like that. But
okay, what if we were interested? I hear you say students, and I haven't looked into your stuff very much, but obviously you're a coach for your type of investing. Where do we go to find that, to find out what the fees are and how to sign up and that kind of thing?
Yeah, well, I can tell you can go to dealswithjason.com if you want to, but I'm not really taking on any more one-on-one students. So I'll tell you how my program works and what I'm doing and how you can get access to it. But all my coaching is one-on-one. So I help all my students close their first 3 deals. And then once they've done their 3 deals, they just hit the ground running, because it's so easy to buy houses at almost full price. It's hard to buy them at 70 cents on the dollar or 60 cents on the dollar, right? So my coaching program it's $9,000 up front, and it's $497 a month. The $9,000 up front gets reimbursed to the student as they do deals. So on their very first deal, I also do 50% deal splits on the down payment. So on their very first deal, they get the first $3,000 of the down payment, and then we split the difference. On their second deal, they get the first $3,000, and we split the difference 50-50. On the third deal, first $3,000, we split 50-50. So they get their $9,000 back if they do deals. If they don't do deals, then I was poorly paid for my time because I make more than that on one deal that I could have been doing without them. So, but for right now, what's going on in my personal business is I am in the process of building multiple portfolios for myself. And rebuilding the portfolio that I allowed to kind of fall apart. So I'm not taking on any more one-on-one students. I have 3 that I'm working with now that I'm going to exhaust. It's a 6-month program. I don't think I said that, but that's how it works. And they can continue to have access to me for deal structure as long as they pay their monthly fee every single month. They can call me anytime they want and say, hey, I got this deal. If I help them close that deal, if I'm on the phone with the seller, then the 50% deal split on the down payment applies. But they have access to me. I have students that I've been working with for over 2 years that still call me and still pay their monthly fee because they need help with deal structure. So that's really how my coaching program works. However, I'm only one person. And every time I do one of these, it ends up going out on the internet. I get 50 people that want me to coach them, and I just can't. So, and if we decide to do something, Jim, anyone that's part of the network, we'll create something super special for them, but right now, my focus is on building my business in a box that I can sell for $1,000, right? I'm going to put my entire business in one package that all these people that call me and ask me to coach them, I can just say, hey, if you want, you don't need me to coach you. Here's all the information you need from beginning to end to do this business. If you decide you want coaching, call me, right? And then that way I can service a lot more people and help them, with true freedom,
Yeah. So, I guess it's a long-winded answer of saying the timing's not perfect right now for Jason, and there is stuff that will be coming, and
we'll discount that to everyone in the network half off. So once I get that done, if people are interested in seeing my entire business, we'll make sure that they get a good deal on it if they're part of the network. If not, they got to pay full price, right? So that's what we're doing. And if they decide they want personal coaching after that, I'd be happy to do it, because the beauty of the business in a box is they're already primed, right? They know what we do. They just need help closing deals. And that's what I love, right?
Awesome. Well, hey, Jason, I really do appreciate you, man. Thank you for your time. Hey guys, for this particular show, go to doors2deals.com/024. You're going to find all sorts of useful information there, including a video replay, show notes, links with other great resources on it. So that's a wrap, guys. Go out, live your purpose, and above all else, go after your dreams. Till next time. Thanks for tuning into this show. For more episodes and resources that will unlock Doors to Deals, check out our website, doors2deals.com.